As Wilson O'Connell. My pronouns are he, him. I'm an assistant professor of higher education in the Education Policy Studies program at Penn State and director of the Black Study and Education Lab. Allow me to begin our time together by first naming Penn State as located on the unceded lands of the Erie, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, the Shawnee, the Susquehannock, Wazazi nations. In an effort to continue to consider place and space, we also understand institutions of higher education as multi-generational sites of violence and dispossession, whereas African descendant people were subject to the violence of forced labor that continues to shape social and political life. For us in the Black Study and Education Lab, grappling with time, with space, with history, the work of memory is part and parcel of how we have to think about and contextualize our work. And so many thanks to those of you who have contributed to bringing this work together, namely the Center for the Study of Higher Education at Penn State and the Black Study and Education Lab team consisting of doctoral students Michael Morgan, Holly Graham, Marinus Castillo. Many thanks also to Mary Pierce for all of your administrative and logistic support. You will be able to find a recording of today's event on our YouTube page, so do please be on the lookout for more information about that matter. The Black Study and Education Lab is concerned with exploring the potentialities of Blackness in educational research, practice, and policy. The lab is dedicated to the radical affirmation of Blackness as capacious, grounded in the belief that Black study is a force of disruption. We seek to destabilize existing epistemological protocols, challenging how knowledge is produced and disseminated. By harnessing Black study to detect and call forth otherwise possibilities, we refuse singularity and easy solutions to the problematic of anti-Blackness and embrace a dynamic, ever-evolving engagement with Black ideas. These commitments, they guide our rigorous engagement with Blackness and the Black condition, amplifying voices and experiences beyond institutional boundaries. Our ultimate aim is to deploy Black study as a project of critical analysis and imagining otherwise ways of knowing, of doing, of being in the world, and creating generative spaces for Black self-definition and Black futures. Today, we turn our attention to a fundamental question. Who and what is being destroyed, and what analytic models can we develop through creative practices of world building to confront the layers of violence inflicted on our interconnected world? For us, this isn't solely an inquiry. It's a matter of a responsibility, of thinking about the most vulnerable lives and the social conditions that sustain them. As genocide, ecocide, scholasticide, and culturalcide intersect in places such as Palestine, Sudan, Congo, Haiti, we recognize these acts of destruction as interwoven with the unabating climate crisis, surging restrictions in policy and practice, and unresolved historical legacies. Our response to this collective violence requires us to think creatively and to act boldly to build worlds that protect and sustain rather than dismantle. And so many of us, we follow in this line of Black creative praxis, and we think of it as an invitation into possibilities for resistance, for care, and sustained living. In that regard, it is a privilege to be in conversation today with Drs. Kenjis Watson and Tiffany Marie. Dr. Kenjis Watson is a father, partner, brother, uncle, and son who strives to honor ancestral ways of knowing, practice, presence, and bridge more sustainable and loving relationships, projects, and educational futures. Dr. Watson works toward this calling in part through his role as an assistant professor of urban education in the School of Education at American University. Kenjis also contributes time as an earthen-based builder specializing in super adobe home construction as an instructor with the Cal Earth Institute. Watson also collaborates alongside mutual and community responsive projects as research lead, educator, and co-founder of the Institute for Regenerative Futures in the College of Education at San Jose State University. Dr. Tiffany Marie is the daughter of Cheryl Marie, the great-granddaughter of Dorothy and Annette Williams, and the great-granddaughter of Artelia Green and Olivia Williams. She is Kashmir Ina's mommy, an end-of-life practitioner, and a recovering academic. Coming from a long line of Arkansas educators, she is passionate about learning with and from youth building with beloved communities, sewing, music production, and connecting with the natural world. Dr. Tiffany Marie also serves as the co-director of the Institute for Regenerative Futures and a professor of teacher education and ethnic studies at San Jose State University. Drs. Watson and Marie, thank you all so much for engaging with us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, peace, Dr. Okello. Thank you, Michael. Really, the whole group of folks who are making life happen at in Happy Valley. I was there a while ago, and there were people doing that work then too. But goodness, if it didn't almost kill me. Um, so I appreciate what y'all are doing, and thank you for inviting us. I'm going to speak first, and then the good doctor, Sister Tiffany Marie, is going to take us home. Our work today is really a meditation and a practice. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'm going to give a few caveats as I do that. First, that our hope here today is to share about apocalyptic education, the life, the death, and the afterlife, in some ways as a preview for the conversation that Tiffany and I had, or will have for folks who are attending to our podcast in the second season of our Apocalyptic Ed podcast, where we review coming to terms with the work that we've been doing since we first met in 2018, but maybe since we've been called to be doing throughout our life. So that's our work today. And we'll share about the movement of AE through life, through death, and through afterlife. We don't have very many slides. I appreciate the grounding, both in upholding the sacredness of our relationships and other people's relationships to the lands where we are, and the grounding that those relationships require a different kind of ethic of sharing knowledge, of building deeper relationships with that knowledge with each other, and that ethic need not be attending to the very conditions that brought us into the situation that we are in. So we uplift something I heard from Fred Moten once, who was sharing this by way of Cedric Robinson, who had shared by way of C.O.R. James, about the aim of Black studies, which is the critique of Western civilization. I mean, all the things that give modernity life and breath. And if the aim is the critique, then the object might be, as you all have so beautifully laid out, the possibilities, the praxis, the new worlds that are available to us through Blackness. So for us, we're going to share pictures, we're going to share stories, we'll share music and ceremony with you all today, with the aim and the object deeply in mind, heart, and body. So, life of AE. Apocalyptic Ed, for us, begins with this conversation Tiffany and I were having around our work, that collective work around telomeres, or the biomarkers that are conventionally related to aging, that help us get a better sense of what the ravages of the world, stress, and impact might be on the body. Public health researchers typically, along with biologists, sociologists, have utilized telomeres to better understand weathering or the impacts of environmental toxins and stressors on the health and well-being of different communities. We had built our work around coalescing this common tool that we were both using, but for different reasons. And I just wanted to share a bit like how I came into it. So we say that in our piece, Apocalyptic Ed, really engages remembering, a critical memory and searching of previously severed knowings, as a way to responsibly usher us from one ending world to life anew. For me, coming into relationship with telomeres was, one might call it, a selfish act of care, the kind of care that Christina Sharp reminded us a while ago about wake, the wake work that we are often invited into to attend to the everyday mourning that often visits Black life, and that we are constantly trying to revere for the sake of honoring Black death. For my wake in my life that was existing throughout a number of different realities that often are parasitic on Black beingness, came to a culminating moment in the beginning of my doctoral study when I learned that 3 of my mom's 4 brothers had developed prostate cancer. The youngest of whom, my Uncle Ken, who was diagnosed with the most severe form of prostate cancer. This was also happening as the different ruptures or moments of uh, our people's responses to policing were sort of spilling over. Trayvon Martin had been murdered. Mike Brown was murdered. Sandra Bland, Jamal Crawford, Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, amongst many others within my first year. And so I originally wanted to better understand telomeres um, with the belief that in doing so, I might be able to learn something that could maybe save the life of my uncles, um, maybe something that might lead us to better understanding how we might resuscitate the childhoods and the livelihoods of folks like Trayvon or other young people, um, and maybe even give meaning to my own life, which I wasn't quite interested in at the time, with all that I was sort of experiencing. And so it was this belief of a tool that we might have access to everlasting life or longevity at the very least. That was challenged, right? Telomeres challenged my even my framing of longevity. Um, right? We know that the way that our people have been brought, moved, shifted, ontologies attempted to be destroyed, had sometimes to do with the absolute destruction of longevity on this plane, in this earth. And we also know that part of the very accumulation of Black beingness is about sustaining um, a kind of existence for as long as possible. And to me, there was this kind of I'm sorry, so raise your hand. There was this kind of rupture that was being brought as we were envisioning or thinking about myself, thinking about telomere length as being tied to our experiences with everyday forms of anti-Blackness, and the aim of learning about telomeres to interrupt anti-Blackness, the idea that if we could just figure out a way to survive microaggressions or survive everyday anti-Blackness, to give more life to ourselves, that itself might be enough. And so there's some good stuff there for sure. There's some viable pathways of further reflection. But in reflecting on where we were at when we first came into this work, I'm thinking about um, this idea that the goal is to live forever, right? And that what might need to be necessary, in fact, is a kind of death, a death of relationship with the thing of the object of our critique at first was school and schooling, a relationship to the possibilities of success and all that school is supposed to grant us, even as we talk in these mediums here, a relationship with what it is to know, what it is to share, what it is to be. Um, I think that we oftentimes, in flippantly talking about abolition myself, um, don't always necessarily sit with what it means to uh, really usher the end of a relationship, the end of a process and project. Um, and sometimes I skip too quickly to the possibilities of life within and after. So I'm interested in what is possible when we let go of the need to even try to live forever, to maybe live to be 150, and instead lean into the ways that we might honor, revere, and accept the necessities of death, even if it means a death of security in relationship to these places that we're currently in. And with that, I'll pass it on to Sister Tiff.
Thank you, Candice. I in part of my bio, introduce this idea both as a recovering academic and end-of-life care practitioner or death doula. And so part of what I'm going to do right now is support us in leaning a little bit closer to this relationship with death, and for us to dive as deeply as we can, as comfortable as it may be. I don't want to activate folks in ways that are harmful. And so move as you feel safe enough to move. And for the first part of this, I'm going to revisit a section of our actual article, Apocalyptic Education. And then I want to support you all to walk through and return to your bodies as the greatest teacher. Candice and I can say a lot, but your bodies will tell you and teach you so much more than us today. And so at any point, if it is safe for you, I invite you to close your eyes at any point as I'm talking and sharing, to ground yourself, to place your feet on as solid of a foundation as you can, and listen with your body. And so in the text, I write particularly about the Black church. And I said that the Black church embodies an intricate balance between life and death. It's the site of most wakes, the place where we gather to make sense of a loss of life, a fundamental shift in the melodies that once sung us into existence. And at this particular gathering, the presence of the body, particularly the Black body, provides context for how we can make sense of our plunder, if and only if we choose to look at it. There are very few of us who have not heard about or experienced, for that matter, the reverberation of Jubilee, the elevation of calloused hands toward a heaven, a new world, so to speak, an embodiment of imagined existences. I've even come to believe that what it means to catch the Holy Ghost, as my grandmother called it, is to escape the terrors, tortures, and disasters of our current world. The violence and captivity that Wilderson suggests are the grammar and ghosts of our every gesture, and to experience a simplicity of life as neither pursued nor captured, but merely as being. In many wakes, or funerals that I've attended, I've observed congregants, when it is their time to view the body, to confront its existence, they tense up, or they leave the church or the building altogether. Alternatively, some walk by the body very quickly so as to avoid seeing its rigor. And others talk to the body, pick up the body from the casket, they kiss it, they hold on to it, refusing to let it go, to let it be what it is: dead. It seems we all grieve differently. And as a classroom teacher, my colleagues and I have dealt with the everyday presence of death in schools in similar ways. The denial exists, the attempts to reposition the body remain. However, we differ from wakes and other religious sites of death because we have not yet pronounced schools dead. Instead, the body, our schools rather, have continued to decay. And at this point, it's almost impossible to avoid the stench of death within our curricula and college matriculation efforts. There are some of us who ignore the presence of death, and others whose efforts are predicated on a more conscious position acknowledge the stench within academic papers, conferences, professional development, policy, our conscious paraphernalia. We attempt to access the most sound pedagogical way to usher our students through the complexities of social death. However, our eventual collusion to the normal or normative practices and procedures of schools, a bargain with death, so to speak, are but the flowers that surround the casket. Their presence, despite how perfuming, or maybe because of how fragrant, often distract us from the death that lay before us. And so today, I want to invite us to sit with that death, to listen to it, to think about our relationship with it, and listen for a little bit with our bodies. I'm going to offer some music and the opportunity for us to have an embodied experience with death and with our relationship with death. How that interacts with our relationship with schools and schooling.
We'll welcome you back. we wanted Tiff and I to be able to give space actually to further encounter what may have been coming up for us as we reflect on the death of schools and schooling, and our deeper relationships with death itself. We had some questions that we consider within the realm of the afterlife. That we're hoping that we could give some space to both read these, engage them, and then, if you feel so called, to write uh, or and somehow track what might be coming up. We want to hear from you after we have these moments of sort of reflective writing. And we know that in hearing from you, it may came for welcoming, however that may be. That might be in form of questions, maybe in the form of what you're writing, or some sort of reflection on an embodied experience. So we're going to share a question, invite some time to write, share another question, invite some time to write, and share one more question and invite time to write. And again, part of our belief or grounding is that in trying to share about apocalyptic education, we think it'd be important to actually practice and encounter apocalyptic education. So we hope that you continue to stay with us on this practice that we feel called into. So the first question or set of questions are these: what is your relationship to death, to the dead body that Tiffany was speaking about? What are the sensations, the fears, the memories that you have related to the dead body? So we'll give a few moments to write about this. We'll also uh, put this in the chat for everyone to see.
I got that, Candice. You can just keep going.
Okay. The next set of questions are: how do these feelings, sensations, or memories inform how you see and conceptualize the body of schools as dead? How might these feelings or sensations and memories inform how you see and conceptualize the body of schools and schooling as dead? And the last set of questions are: where might you be feeling stuck in this process of grief? So again, we'll just invite you all to take some moment to engage some of the questions, and then we'll reconnect in just a moment. Oh, I'll put those back up because I guess it's more difficult to share the chat. So the last question is: where might you be feeling stuck in this process? How do these feelings and sensations and memories inform how you see and conceptualize the body of schools as dead? And what's your relationship to death, to the dead body? What are the sensations, fears, or memories that you have related to the dead body? Right. Well, thank you all for taking the time. So much of the work in the academy is um, feels like at odds with time. You know, even as we function in a way of creating the whole concept of time. But we appreciate you all embracing the space. Um, and now we just wanted to really invite some engagements and connections. We see that uh, at least one person's raised their hand. We've heard, we saw some responses in the question and answer. This time we really had hoped that we could be more in collective conversation. So again, we're wanting to hear from you in the form of questions, maybe in your reflections, as some of you have offered. And we have we have some time, so Tiffany and I can probably be in direct response to what's coming up. But for now, I see that Janine Staples Dixon, I hope I'm saying your name somewhat close to how you might say it. We wanted to just ask you to go ahead and talk if you're able to. Whenever you might be ready, go ahead. We had uh, we had one question, or at least some reflection from one of the attendees who said that they have deep uncertainty or perhaps an unveiling of my true actualized being and or essence. Having had close relatives pass on, I am yet to unravel the depth and piece together the meaning, if any, on why. Why them? Why now? I've also been accustomed to violence, having grown in environments where I had to flee genocide and never quite settling and or having the framework to process the numerous deaths and the grasp it has on my people. Thank you for sharing that.
We want to invite other questions or hands or spaces for folks to share components of their reflections. And in apocalyptic education, we really invest in the value of community, communal sensibilities. We see that as a form of meaning making. And in these spaces, we know that talking, and particularly the invited presenters talking, is the norm. And so we're hoping to disrupt some of that this morning, or today with you all. So if you so feel led, please share. All right, Felix.
Hello. I just wanted to expand a little further on the reflection on how to process uncertainty, and the piece there really stems deep. And From my perspective, the biggest issue or something that I would say I'm still grappling with, is being able to be in a mindset where I'm settled enough to actually take in what just happened. Right? We live in a modern world, and we have things going on every day, and sometimes you can almost get just stuck into the emotions of the day to day. And the reason why I bring that up is it can almost be an excuse, or just as a kind of band-aid to just slap on and not really face on what just happened, right? And from my perspective, well, this in my case, having gone in multiple environments and and I've lived in 5 countries now, and different places, learning different cultures, and basically, to boil it down in the context of this conversation, upon reflecting on it, there seems to be almost an escape. Whenever I get to the point where I'm fully settled and I can actually face this, right? And it's almost a little bit too scary, and I'll just move on. And I know, in a couple of years, in a couple of months, I'll move on, and I'll reset, and I'll make a whole new, environment for myself. And then I just keep pushing the, as you say, kick the bucket down the line. So I'm just curious, on your perspective on the best way to kind of go about that, or it's also just a reflection.
It's beautiful. Thank you. And I just was, in part of our practice or my practice, especially in end of life care, is really about being a mirror. So I was just taking notes. And what really stood out to me that was incredibly powerful that landed in my body, one was this idea of the spaces to take in what has just happened. And where's the space, or where are the spaces to take in what has happened? And then part of what I also heard and lands with me deeply is the ways in which we distract. And when we get to this point where we can face what is really in front of us, what has just happened, sometimes those spaces are very scary. And then we kind of create these other spaces to go to make, to move on, or to avoid, or to not sit with. And so I have more questions than anything. And part of that is, and one question that comes to me is, I have curiosity, not just for you, Felix, but for all of us. What is so frightening about sitting with what has just happened?
Could you come up with a question again? I missed you just there for the last bit there.
I think my curiosity is around the fear that comes in the sitting.
Oh, I see.
The fear in sitting with what is happening, or what has just happened, or sitting with death, to be explicit.
Right. It's a great question. Great question. Can I go ahead and answer, at least give my perspective here?
Please.
Yeah. Yeah, I think to paint a little bit of a picture of the environments per se that I was talking about, having to flee genocide, or environments where it's just difficult to even perceive, right? With Mr. Okello brought up, Sudan and Palestine and things, places like that, and that's pretty much the settings, those kind of settings that I was born into, right? And from my perspective, really, um, I'm not sure if there will be a scientific or like a genetic component to this, or how it eventually affects the genes, or basically how the body expresses certain, proteins as far as how to process. Let's just say, if you're born into this kind of environments, right? I believe in environments having a big impact on how our bodies eventually um, come to be, right? So I'm not sure mentally, or how the brain develops, but in some cases, there could be a situation where maybe the emotional faculties that are able to process these kind of emotions don't fully develop, right? That could be one thing. But on the other end as well, being in environments where not just yourself, but also your parents preceding you and grandparents and all your ancestors, having been accustomed to these kinds of conflicts, these kind of environments with just numerous deaths, not just from, just war, but also the world itself, right? You have diseases, you have, to put it simply, death is everywhere. It almost lurks and waits for you. So the reason why I bring that up is there could also be a certain element of, the people preceding us not even being able to understand how to process this. And to them, when children see them, how they process it, they just keep quiet about it, right? Um, at the very least, they move on quickly because they cannot afford to to be in that kind of environment. Because if they break down, then everything goes down, and you're the next victim in line to be wiped out, so to say. But that's just kind of my perspective here.
Yeah, thank you, Felix. That's a incredibly powerful reflection. A lot is coming up for me as you're sharing. I'm going to read what at least one other attendee just mentioned, that they said they wonder if what is so frightening, because I think this is somewhat connected, about sitting with what has just happened, is that we'll never get back up again. That if we open ourselves up to the grief and face our collusion or our bargains with death dealing machines, that will crumble. We will turn to dust. My mom once said, I've told this story a couple of times in response to some of the work that we did, for the study, and that Tiffany and I referred to around telomere length. What we found was that attending the nation's top universities did not protect Black students from exactly what we hear you talking about, Felix, which might be like the ravages that take place inside the body that seem to be indicating, future harm, if not lack of sustainability. That attending universities, the bargains that at least my mom had was told she needed her children to make in order to grant us greater life, that it didn't protect us. And I asked her what she made of that, that how she sat with that, if that makes any sense, with that truth. Since so much of her advice to myself and my three sisters had been about, hey, just push through, right? Work twice as hard, take the beating, do what you need to do to move through so that you can get greater access to survival and autonomy. And she offered this reflection. She said that, having given birth to myself and my three sisters, she realized was akin to giving birth to 4 pieces of paper inside of a burning forest. That's what it was like to exist within this world. And that she had hoped to find some way to protect us. But our ancestors, the trees, had been on fire for some time. And both their agony and the environment that we were born into itself was making it, more difficult for our very survival. So dousing us with water or ash or whatever she could find to help us live just a little bit longer was the ultimate goal. And that what she ultimately decided or has understood is the best move would be to move through that forest. But this concept of turning to dust, or having the very ground that we are standing on become our permanent home, more rapidly than we expected, is how I think about the relationship that I have, or that many of us have, to schools and schooling, that we did not intend, and many of us did not envision or dream our way into these places. And yet here we are, inside places on fire, literally in some cases, and um, metaphorically or psychologically, emotionally, spiritually in others. And I wonder what wisdom there might be actually with trees, those who go through the fires that are happening. There are redwoods that are giving us really important medicine around trees and fire. I think about the wisdom of trees that, essentially go back into the earth and offer their own life force so that others can grow, and that being something that we mirror as human beings. I think about how much of our bodies are made of what we call dust anyway, and what it would mean to invite a different kind of relationship with a long-term vision of existence. So to that, just wanted to offer or speak to the questions that were just put forward, and think about what it would mean to leave these spaces, or to to be intentionally becoming dust in these spaces. And I see a few other folks said, Jacqueline, for me, what came up is the sonic imaginary. Since various ancestors, including my father, passed, I struggle with the sonic wake.
I have curiosity about who's in the crowd, who's listening. It looks like there's about 28 participants, and we've done such a beautiful job, which, Kendris and I, this season of the podcast, really go back and hold the mirror up against ourselves about how we would approach the article differently now that we've buried other people. We've sat with death in different ways. We have very different relationships to the academy even from 2018. And I really deeply appreciate how the vulnerability that folks are sharing with their words, and how we've been able to, in just this short amount of time together, really be honest about the fear. And I don't think we did that justice in our piece, in this afterlife, and reflecting that fear of death. It is the number one fear in our society, death. So thank you for that vulnerability. And I'm so grateful for the space to just hold that. And what I am offering back, whether or not we have folk out there who have experience holding the fear, sitting in it, and if there's any wisdom that y'all would like to offer us.
Yeah, hello again.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just want to circle back, I guess, to just kind of talk about why, if that could also be even a reason, but um being comfortable with not facing, or not even embracing, or not even looking into the depths of facing this, you know, basically bigger than life thing that we have to face inevitably. To me, sometimes when I think about it, it's almost like if I was to play a guitar or some musical instrument. At some point, I just kind of get comfort in just playing the music and listening to the music as it is, right? By not trying to dive deep and try to understand, you know, how the string is connected and opening up the whole instrument, you know, with the not fear, but with the hope that, you know, I'll keep the instrument intact, right? Because to me, um, part of why I have comfort in, well, I wouldn't say comfort, but one of the reasons why I justify not embracing or not facing that is, you know, it gives me an understanding, you know, hopefully on as to how I can piece my identity and how I could eventually, you know, leave a legacy per se. So back to the analogy with the instrument, do you think being comfortable in not um, diving deep and unraveling some of the deep, let's just say some of the depths that, let's say, in a situation like my case, um, perhaps at this point in time, I still don't have the faculties to be able to process everything, because if I start with me and I start with my relatives, then it will extend to, you know, my people, then it will extend to my countries, and there's still so much that's going on even in real time, to the point where it might be, you know, it's better for my sanity to just kind of let it be, right, and process it as it comes along, you know, however much I'm capable of handling. Do you think so? By bringing that up, do you think there's a flaw or a better way to go about this? Because on one end, it might be almost a cowardly way of going about it, but on the other end, there's this big risk as to, well, of course, you know, the uncertainty of, oh, now what, right? Because at the end of the day, on the other end, it's my brother that's doing all this, you know, all these things, you know, perhaps it's even me that's contributing, you know, indirectly to what's happening now. So, but that's really what I'm getting at here.
We want to invite you, Felix, and others to understand that where we are is beautiful. And what comes up and what we're holding is beautiful. And I was looking for, again, all of what I'm saying today might feel deflective, but it really, hopefully, is reflective. And you talk about cowardice, I'm talking about fear, and I'm going to ground and hope we don't cut off right at 10. But I was looking for another quote, Kinjis and others, and this came up in my phone, and I feel like it's divine, so I'm going to read it. It says flowing, and part of in answering that is, I think maybe we need to stop thinking about the human and the self as these models to study. And one of the greatest spaces, and Kinjis brings this up, that we can really ground ourselves and understand is the natural world. Yeah. And especially around their relationship with death. Yeah. So this quote says, flowing always like this day and night. It is the same kind of insight. If everything is impermanent, there cannot be a permanent entity. This is the meaning of non-self. Non-self does not mean non-person or non-existing. Even though you are non-self, you continue to be a person with a body, with feelings, with perceptions, with mental formations and consciousness. You continue to be a person, but a person without a separate self. Is there anything that has a separate self? A tree that stands in the front yard does not have a separate self. Without the sunshine, without the clouds, without the air, without the minerals, a tree cannot be there. A tree is made of non-tree elements because a tree has no separate existence. We say a tree has no self. The self of the tree is made up of the self of the non-tree elements. Let us not be caught by words. Let us touch reality deeply and transcend all worlds. The person is only possible because she is non-self. Because of impermanence and non-self, everything is possible, including the person. And that if you witness that truth, you and we all will suffer much less. If you witness that truth concerning yourself, the quote says, you will transcend your fear of dying, of becoming nothing. And I'd even translate that into becoming or turning to dust. To those things, I say ashe.
Ashe and Ubuntu.
Ashe, Ashe. Doctors Watson and Marie, thank you all so much for this deep grounding and meditation, this invitation to sit with your prescient questions around our relationship to death, our feelings and sensations as it relates to death and how they relate to schooling, and also this piece around what it means to where we see ourselves getting stuck in our sort of grappling with. And so I suspect that many of us will carry these questions with us for the foreseeable future as we continue to sit with and parse out responses. But in the meantime, this has been rich and deeply inviting. And so we collectively thank you for your model, your practice, and ongoing work you're doing with apocalyptic education and the work that you do, really the community-based praxis work that grounds that work. So thank you again for your time, for your energy, your spirit. And thank you all for joining us for this hour, and be on the lookout for updates.